Welcome, welcome, welcome. I see some familiar names. Hello, everyone. We will get started in a second. For those who may not know me, I'm Polly Aringu. I'm the founder of Black Women Photographers. Very excited about today's class. It's the last class of our part one of our series, The Essentials. Yes, and Daphne knows the drill. If you attended one of our classes in this series, please drop your name and your location in the chat. We love to see where people are tuning in from. Thank you, Daphne, for joining us from Toronto. Let's see who else is here. Another Toronto. Welcome, Osi. Welcome, welcome. Switzerland. Yes, nice to see you, Akusa. Trinidad and Tobago, Esther in Kenya, Brooklyn, California, New York, South Africa, Nigeria. There we go. Was waiting for some Nigerians. Dominican Republic. Nice to meet you. Bulgaria, Houston, Texas, Nairobi. Okay, I see my East Africans. We're waiting so far. Nashville, Tennessee, Mumbai, India, St. Louis, Tesseret. Nice to see you. Welcome, everyone. We will get started in a second. Welcome, Camila in Spain. Hey, Cole in South Africa. Hey, Yetu in Johannesburg. Nice to see you all. Hello from Amsterdam. Hello from Ghana. Love it. We will get started in a second. This is our fifth class. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. Fifth class of our series. The last class from the series of part one, as we said in the third class, I believe, we'll do a part two in the fall. So also drop in the chat, what you want to see in the next classes. We already have some good suggestions and we're already working towards making the part two happen. I will turn it to Austin from the Everyday Projects to do some more housekeeping before we get started.
Thanks, Polly, and good to see everybody here, and really fun to watch all of the people coming in the chat. Yes, very excited to do this. I'm Austin Merrill. I'm one of the co-founders of the Everyday Projects, and we are super excited to be here. Let's see. We've got yeah, I think we're about ready to go. What do you think? Should we wait another minute or so, or is it?
Yeah, we can wait in one more second. For those who may not have missed, a class or two or whatever, you can go to our different websites and watch the recaps on the site because we have recorded every session. So don't worry if you missed something, go back and replay, drop the link in the chat. And another thing before we get started, the Everyday Projects has 2 grants open right now worth $6K USD each, and it comes with a mentor as well. You have only a few more days to apply. The deadline is June 7th, and I will also drop that in the chat. You don't have to be a member per se, contributor to the Everyday Projects to apply. Anyone can apply for these grants, so do apply. And if you were in our grant writing session, with Daniela, you already have some advice of how to apply for grants. So
yeah, please check those other videos out. They were all great sessions. Here's how you can follow us at our various social media handles. This is where you can find all the other webinars. And also want to let you know that these webinars are totally free classes. We're excited to have you here, but we would love it if you would make a $5 donation to Black Women Photographers. They are amazing, and anything you can do to help would help them continue to be amazing. So please help out in that regard. As Polly said, we've got our grant. The deadline's coming up on that for the Everyday Projects grant, $6,000 for 2 grants, $6,000 a piece. So please apply for one of those. You'll get some mentorship from either Mallory Benedict of National Geographic or Jahan Jalani of The Guardian. So we're very excited about that. Also want to thank those of our sponsors who made this possible, the Linfest Institute and the Facebook Journalism Project. And thanks also to our regular supporters and partners, Photo Wings, Code for Africa, and Open Society Foundation's Culture and Art. So let's see. I'm going to introduce Yagazie now. Very excited to have her here today. Yagazie Emezi is a Nigerian artist and self-taught photojournalist, focused on stories surrounding African women and their health, sexuality, education, and human rights. Having worked extensively across Africa, Yagazie also covers stories on identity and culture, social justice, climate change, and migration. Her art practice uses photography and sculpture to construct visual critiques of Nigeria's socio-political state and the roles media play in it, pulling from history and current events. Yagazie, welcome. I'm going to see if I can now figure out how to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you. Let's see if this works.
There we go.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Austin and Polly, for putting all of this together. Much appreciated. I'm just going to jump right into it. If you guys see me glancing off to the side, it's because I have little reminder notes on my phone. So just a little bit of a more detailed introduction about myself. Born and raised in Nigeria, studied in the States for about 8 years and decided to move back to Lagos. Well, not move back, but I hadn't lived in Lagos before, but it made sense to be the city to get back to in terms of coming back home. At that time, I moved in 2014, and I actually had no interest back then in photography. Personally, my introduction to photography really started through the use of social media, very much active in the days of Facebook, MySpace, Blogspot, Tumblr. And these were all platforms that were at that time also very visually based, heavily visually based. And wow, it's such a long story. It's such a long story. Let me try and see how I can cut it short. But long story short, I ended up struggling to just make ends meet in Nigeria. And I decided, you know what, why not try taking pictures for a living? Because I had already been sharing random images of my experience in Nigeria online. Let me just make sure that my timer is keeping me on point. And so my first introduction into photography really started off with just shooting for fashion brands around Lagos, but that really didn't speak to me because I was interested in a story element that involved people. So I found myself taking pictures of, people on the street, sort of like moving into street photography. And during that time, I didn't, and this is where I'll go a little bit into the challenges I faced. I didn't have a home. I was living with people, crashing with people in their homes while just trying to get on my feet financially. I didn't have any savings. So I was able to get a few jobs with some local brands in Lagos, just, taking pictures of purses and jewelry and clothes. And along the way, I applied for a job in Liberia to be actually a staff photographer for a nonprofit. And that is where I just moved country and ended up being on staff for this nonprofit for close to a year. And I think that was where it gave me the confidence and a bit of the intimacy of space in relation to, in contrast to Lagos, which is a far more intimidating space to photograph, to just kind of like build my approach. And while working as a staff photographer then, I was able to just, take on random freelance offers that came. And I think for me, it was really about luck and timing. I always tell people that unfortunately, there is not one fixed way or method to make it in this industry, because everybody's experiences are going to be very different. Everybody's opportunities and access is always going to look very different. And it just so happened that I was in Liberia, I think maybe a few years shortly after Ebola had hit, and I believed that some people were just curious to know what Liberia looked like. And that's when I got my first commission with New York Times to cover some stories there. And then from there, it kind of, just rolled out like that. But with this particular class, what I want to kind of like really cover are some of the challenges of balancing, especially when starting out in photography. Some of us may have already been in the game for a while, but still trying to find a balance with really just standing up for ourselves, on understanding how we can stand up for ourselves, the space, and how to basically occupy space. But I really just want to jump in real quick and do a screen share of just a visual introduction to some of my work. Oh wow, is it just my, okay, there we go. So right here, and this is probably also throwing in some advice along the way, is as a photographer, I would really recommend you all to have a professional website beyond, social media platforms, just where editors and other potential clients can view your work. So my landing page really right here is a representation of the sorts of stories that I cover. Current events in Nigeria, stuff around culture, definitely, of course, stuff around women and identity, a bit of fashion, because I never, really leave that alone. Oh, what's happening here? So just going to scroll through some of these images. These images are a mix of work that I have done as an individual and work that I have done on behalf of different publications over the years. I would say I fully began my career in photojournalism in 2016. And it's been quite a journey. So landing page is just really a representation of the sort of images I'm attracted to and I'm passionate about telling. Up here, we have assignments. I have not updated my website for a while, but I do try and I've been trying to classify it according to the publications, and clearly I've only done one so far. So this is just an example of the images that I've done for New York Times, which kind of like link to the articles, because I'm not going to post all the images. So I'll just scroll to that. If you guys need me to slow down a bit, just holla. I have an art portfolio here, which is closed off. If people are actually interested in it, they can personally message me and I can send them a password. And then I think it's also important as photographers to always have a section for your personal work, especially when starting off in photography. A lot of people, one of the most common questions I get is, how do I get commissioned? How do I start telling stories? And the best advice I can give you, and I will tell people to always follow through, is to focus on your personal work first, because that is what is going to get you far. You really have to arm yourself with a camera, even if it's a phone camera, which is also what I started off using before, and go out and tell the stories that you want to tell. So this is a story I did on illegal fishing. I did not get paid for this. This was purely volunteer work. Early in the career, I do believe that there should be a balance with, getting paid for your time, but also following through with your passions. And personally, for me, there are some stories that I will not request payment for, or just, say like, yeah, I'm doing this for free because I am genuinely passionate about it. And I also believe that it will help build my portfolio. And generally, I'm also a big life experience person. So I'm going to do something for myself, and not just the money. A lot of people, unfortunately, aren't in a position, and we must acknowledge that, to just say, you know what, I'm going to do this sort of work for free. But at the same time, they weren't offering me money at all. So I couldn't really just say no. And then, of course, personal projects like that, where I kind of try and incorporate some element of cultural identity into my work. And I'm just going to stop the screen share and get back to the main main topic. There we go. Okay. So I want to just get us talking real quick on some of the challenges that people face. And just a quick disclaimer is, I'm coming from personal experience. What I do want to share with you all is just how to hopefully sort of like create a sense of stability. I'm not saying that I'm the most financially secure person or, I have it all figured out, but I have been able to set up routines and pointers along work that makes me feel a little bit more safe and a little bit more secure, without having to feel that, I'm still struggling, which we've been there before, and I don't want to go back. So some of the challenges and sorry guys, this is going to be a lot of just casual talking to you, but some of the challenges include just trying to find steady income with photography. So when I got started out, I did not have a job. Like I mentioned earlier, I was crashing in people's homes. I didn't know anybody in this new city that I was living in. I was really, really dependent on people's kindness and generosity. And there was a lot, and I'm going to be honest with you, it's not the most glamorous work there is if you don't have the right sort of support. If you do have sort of like family support, or spousal support, or partner support, or anything, I would say please maximize on that and don't take it for granted, because the struggle is real. So some of the challenges is just, finding steady income, which I will now lead to the first step that I had to kind of like stabilizing my footing as a photographer, which was let's talk about opportunities in photojournalism. And my first opportunity was getting this staff job, right? A lot of us, personally, I prefer being a freelancer because I like having my own schedule and whatnot. But at the beginning, I was actively looking for photography staff jobs because I realized that I needed to have some sort of cushioning with savings, right? And I was very fortunate to get, a position out of country and where I was paid as an expat, so a lot of food and housing was covered, and I was allowed to, I was able to save up all my money, which was then after 8 months of living in Liberia, when it was time to freelance, I had this little comfy cushion that I could balance on. So, my first advice to you all is not to be too afraid to seek out staff jobs, because there's no shame in that, and also on the other hand, not to feel as if you have to be a full-time photographer in order to have a career, because there's so many photographers who are juggling and doing it quite well, different careers. You have photographers who are full-time nurses and still having fantastic photo work and a photo career. So I would say try not to shy away from that. But also if freelancing is something that you want to do, absolutely, by all means, work towards it. Moving from, juggling being a staff worker and taking in freelance work. Another of the questions that I often get is, and I wasn't informed about this, was how do you get work? Like, how do jobs come your way, right? And this is also going to later on lead into how we best utilize our social media platforms and our digital platforms and whatnot. I'm quite fortunate to say that I would say like 90% of my work comes to me. I don't actually actively pitch. I'm not a great pitcher. When I started out, I just had a lot of incoming work coming in and I kind of rode that wave. But in my experience, you can find the editors and the publications that you're interested in working with and reach out to them. You know, I only started doing this probably 3 weeks ago because I was so nervous about maybe people thinking that my work wasn't the correct fit for them and I would get rejected. All those natural fears are completely normal, but all my pitches got accepted. So there's that. And then, of course, there are editors who are familiar with your work and who will reach out to you for certain assignments. And then this is kind of where the money conversation comes in, right? And I'm going to pull up some, some contracts that I have set for you. So I want to divide it, and I wish I could have like a blackboard for you guys because I'm not a sort of slideshow sort of person. But with different types of assignments, a lot of publications have what I call fixed contracts, you know, like publications like New York Times, Washington Post, Nat Geo, they have fixed contracts for all their freelance photographers, which I kind of call like heavy legal backing, where I'm just like, you know what, I'm not even going to bother to negotiate with you guys because this is what you use worldwide, right? And the contracts with these sort of like bigger publications are usually fixed and usually standard around the world. Different departments might charge differently. And the one repetitive advice that you'll hear me saying and coming up with all the time is, when you get certain work offers, the best thing you can do for yourself is to turn to other photographers and ask and double check. Just double check, you know. Every single job that I got for the first time, I would hit up a photographer and say, does this day rate sound normal to you? Is this what they paid you? I feel as if there's some world in photojournalism that I'm not aware of where people tend to be closed off to this sort of information with providing it to their colleagues. But thankfully, I'm not exposed to that. And, you know, people should tell you this sort of information. So please reach out to photographers, or even if they're photographers that you don't know, to ask for this sort of information. So with assignments with big publications, they're usually sort of like fixed contracts, right? And in those contracts, you can have what you have like joint copyrights or shared copyrights, in which, sorry, that's the cat, in which you both own the work, right? And then in terms of finding other types of work in which there's more negotiations for within the contracts, there's nonprofit work, you know, there's other sort of clientele work that you can get from photography. So that is another thing that people should consider. And I wish that I had at least entertained it very earlier on in my career, which is the only work out there is not just with, you know, these news publications. And to be quite honest, there's a lot of money out there with with other organizations, be it nonprofits, be it like random research companies and whatnot, and they will send you a contract, which is what, you know, I kind of want to bring up to you guys in terms of just the main key points that everyone should be aware of when reading a contract. Now, all contracts are going to look very different. So let's say a contract from Save the Children might be a lot heftier and beefier in terms of just like child security, behavior, being in high-risk zones, all that other stuff. So I'm going to show you a simplified contract that has sort of like the key points that I always sort of like look out for. Let me do a screen share real quick on desktop. Okay. All right, I very ungracefully blocked out who this client is. I did leave the figures out there for full transparency, and we'll also break down day rates and fees with this sort of more flexible contracts and job offers. And if you see the client's name, no, you didn't. So this is a job that I had last year, and this is kind of like a quick summary of the contract. So a lot of contracts come in with, you know, a lot of legal jargon. which I would advise you, even though it is very grueling, to always read line by line. And a lot of contracts, they will break down the definitions of what each word is that they're going to be using, and it will be under the clause definition. So read that carefully so that you know what the contract is referring to in the later pages, okay? So this is a very neat example of a job that I did with a client, and kind of like what they're asking for. So we have, the project purpose, what they want me to do, the sort of work they want me to do, the deadline, the fees. With these clients that aren't, once again, like the fixed publications with their fees, I usually always demand some sort of percentage upfront, because you're not going to have me going out to a certain location and laboring for free. It's kind of like extra insurance, and you're really within your full rights to ask about that. Okay, so now we have, what do I have here? Oh. Am I doing this right? Okay, let's just look at the first page, right? Where we have terms and conditions, which describes the scope of work, the work that you're supposed to be doing. Final deliverables, which is an edit of up to 53 photos, 13 per day. Usually some clients will ask to see the photos every day. Depending on the amount of photos that they ask for, I usually negotiate with them and tell them that I can't do post-production on images and send them to them every single day. I can do it every other day. So that is, and by the way, if you guys want us to come back to this, I'm kind of running through it because I'm really actually going to be dependent on your questions to actually beef this out more. So we have final deliverables. Let's go over to this area here. Documentation, this is still the description of what they want, payment and fees. There's always going to be a flat rate, a day rate, which we will also talk about later in terms of just like setting your day rate and knowing what a good strong day rate is. Expenses, please naturally always be aware that a client, even for the fixed contracts with the bigger publications and whatnot, they will always and should always cover your expenses. Nothing comes out of pocket, in a matter of speaking, which now leads me back to the importance of how having that staff job really helped me in terms of just being cushioned, because not all clients will, let's say you have to fly to a different state or another country for a job. Some clients might say, okay, we're going to book your ticket for you, right? And other clients will fully expect you to book your ticket, and then you can invoice it back as an expense where you get reimbursed for that expenditure. So that really helped me in terms of just having a little bit of extra spending money so that I could spend for this job in order to get more back. Post-production hours, also each time that you spend working on images should be in contracts as well, because that takes time. You're not, and we're going to break down the fees better, but you're not just getting paid as a photographer to take pictures. So if you're, and sometimes they do, some certain publications, if they pay you $450 a day, that is the day rate, unfortunately, for your labor and your images. With other clients, outside of those fixed contracts, I charge them for my labor, and I charge them for holding the images, which is a whole other licensing talk that we're going to discuss, right? Now, use and rights granted. This is such an important part to always look at when it comes to all contracts. Once again, those fixed contracts with the larger publications are usually a bit more tricky. Not to say that you can't push back, but because they have such long-term, deep-seated legal drive-ins behind it, they would literally have to do an entire internal reformation for that. But, you know, with nonprofits, with other loose clients that reach out to you, use and rights is something that you should always fight for. I didn't realize this until probably 2 years ago, where I realized that I was giving away my photography rights to a client basically for free. They were paying me a day rate, but they weren't paying me for the images. So under section 3 here, we have, you know, all images. And sorry, guys, this is not the most visually riveting thing there is, you know, but I will tell you that this is very important in terms of also building value up on your work later down the road. Shared copyrights. Can I highlight this? Yes. Shared copyrights basically means that the client and yourself have the same rights to the images, right? So you can sell the images, you can do whatever you want with the images, and the client can do the same as well, right? What you rarely ever want to do with a client is to give them a full copyright or an exclusive copyright. Exclusive means that it is, and sometimes these words confuse me, so please double check. But exclusive means that it is exclusively theirs. You can't do anything with it. You know, you can't do an exhibition. You can't, like, maybe you can put it on your portfolio. That's the max you can do with it. But I also want us to be thinking as photographers about the power in longevity of our works. A lot of my personal work and also a lot of my actual work that has traveled is because I own the rights to them. And if I want to sell them as prints or whatever the case may be, I can actually do that. And I don't have to go double check with a client and say, please, is it okay if I sell my image? So with a lot of clients, you always want to do either shared copyright or you want to do what I call fixed licensing. Because some clients might not be comfortable with a shared copyright. This is because with specifically nonprofit work, in my experience, you will be covering some sensitive stories, and the client is also trying to look out for their beneficiaries. So if you're doing a story on malnutrition and whatnot, they might want those images to be exclusively theirs because they might be worried that you're maybe trying to sell a picture of a sick child. I mean, ethics is a whole other conversation that I could go off on. So they're trying to protect themselves and their beneficiaries most of the time. But I always push for it. It's a trust thing where I'm like, you have to trust what I'm going to do with my work, because what I do with it, if I use it badly, it's also a reflection on me and not just on you. Some clients might not want to do shared copyrights, which is where you now offer them a licensing agreement. Now, a licensing agreement basically means that you are giving them the image, and it's a document that states what they are using the image for specifically, and more importantly, how long they are using the images for. And we'll touch on that when I break down the fees. Okay. Conditions to performance. I don't really read this kind of stuff, but I would advise you all to read it. I would say that when you read a contract a first couple of times, I would advise you guys to always do that so that you can just understand and get the general jargon of what they are saying. There's always a lot of legal language, and I never hesitate to reach out to them and say, please simplify this. I don't know what it means. Break it down into like the simplest words for me to understand, because you're not going to confuse me in with these words, you know? And in my experience, they all do. And if they don't, I mean, that's a problem, right? Section 6 is releases. Releases with nonprofits and other clients is important, especially if depending on what they're using the images for. So let me know if you guys want me to talk about releases and consent. I do think it's something we should be familiar with, but usually there's always someone to help you out with that. Force majeure is pretty self-explanatory, whatever. Copies. Okay, let me just move this thing. Here's an important part, and we'll talk about this in our expenses and fees. Never give out your raw files to any client. Never, ever, 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 unless they're paying for it and they have to pay a lot of money for it. When a client asks for a specific number of images, actually, you know what, we'll touch on this later, but just remember this part is if they're asking for raw files and retouched images, they're paying for that because you are giving them fully your intellectual property to do whatever they want to do. For a lot of us, we have our own post-production techniques on our images, and some people don't care about it, but I personally care about it. Our post-production edits is what actually makes our images look like our work. It makes us feel more connected to our work outside of just the story. And so if you send them your raw, untouched images, and untouched is a different conversation, what makes it yours? They can do whatever they want to do. They can slap a filter on it and put it up on a billboard because they have the raw file, and they'll do whatever they want to do with it. Okay, and that's it. Depending on you guys' questions to bring me back to, let's pull this up. Wow, I have the client's name up there. Okay, now we have the breakdown of, this is the fun part, the breakdown of costs and fees. Let me just double check my notes to make sure that I'm not losing anything. Okay, so usually with nonprofits, when they ask you what your day, it's always good when people ask you, what potential clients ask you what your day rate is. A little background story, please. If you need to screenshot this or whatever the case may be, please do. One of the things that I struggled with personally when starting out was just how to set a day rate for myself outside of those fixed contracts, So some publications charge $450 a day, some do $500, some do $350. And those are the ones that are fixed. That is their standard rates. And once again, always double check with your colleagues saying, hey, do you know someone who has worked with this publication? How much did they get paid? How much should I charge for this? Always double check and reach out to people because that will be so invaluable. So when I started out, I remember turning to one of my colleagues and I asked him, I was like, how much is your day rate? And he was like, oh, and this was in 2016. And he told me that his day rate was $350 a day. So I said, I think I'll go up to $450 because why not? Why not give it a shot? Usually if somebody gives me an amount that's their amount, I'm going to aim higher. So I went with $450 and the client was like, sure, no problem. And then there's no truly confident way of setting a day rate for yourself without feeling lowballed, especially when the client says, yeah, sure, why not? So when I first started out in photography, my day rate was about $450. And then when I moved to Liberia, I shot my shots. Another nonprofit had reached out to me and said, hey, are you interested in doing this and doing this story? And they asked me what my day rate was. And I was like, you know what, let me just shoot my shot. And I said $750, right? And they were like, sure. And I was like, well, each time I set a higher day rate for myself and it's accepted, I'm never going to go down, right? Okay, so with them, my day rate now is standardly is just $1,000 a day. Nonprofits have money. Nonprofits are massive organizations. Do not feel bad in charging them, just don't feel bad about that. Charge them money. So with them, I said, my day rate is 1,000. I have a hazard day rate because I was working during the time of COVID, and just by once again asking other photographers using platforms like Women Photograph to just see what a hazard pay is. And I was told that a hazard pay is standardly like half of your day rate. So I get a hazard pay on top of my day rate, And then I have a post-processing day rate, which I play around with 150 to 200 a day, but I said, okay, you know what? I can do 150. And of course, anytime that you have to get on a plane for work, you need to be charged a travel day rate. In retrospect now, my travel day rate in this document is actually too low, because some bigger publications that pay less of a day rate actually pay more of a travel day rate, which is about $300 a day. And I only charge them $150. So in the future, I would probably, charge them $300 for each day that I get on a plane. With travel day rates, if you fly out and you land and you start photographing, you do not get a travel day rate because it didn't take you a day to travel. You'll just get a standard day rate. But however, let's say I left in the morning and my destination, I didn't arrive in the evening and I couldn't photograph, you're going to compensate me for that time. So there's that. Now, with shared copyrights, what I had initially pitched, well, I can't do that. What I had initially pitched to the client was they wanted full exclusivity. Exclusivity means that I don't get rights to the images, and they get everything. So I charged them about $7,000. Actually, I went up to 10,000, but I said, okay, you know what? Let me do 7,000, right? And they got back to me and they said, hey, we really can't do this. This is super pricey. So then I gave them options, right? And my option was like, yeah, no problem. Unfortunately, that's my fixed rate. For full exclusivity. And bear in mind, this sort of nonprofit work is very much different from commercial work, which unfortunately I'm not experienced in. So I can't advise you on that, but commercial work exclusivity is a lot more than 10,000. Let's just put it on like that. So with nonprofits, I'm still playing around. So I reached out to the client and I said, well, what we could do is we can do a licensing, and with the licensing, and this is a little bit of like, wordplay where I list out the limitations that the licensing gives, which is like you'll only be able to use the images for about a year or maybe 2 years, but it will be $2,000, or we can do shared copyright for $4,000. And they said yes. So that's it. For usage, shared copyright of up to 40 images. This is the only time I might, and yeah, I didn't give them the raw files. So some clients usually request that you send them all the images that you've taken while on assignment, and absolutely not. You have to give me a figure for me to actually work and send you these images. And all in all, I would say 10,600 for 40 images is not bad. And also the work wasn't, it depends on your level of intensity, but the work wasn't a hard job for me. So honestly, this is what I would call easy money. Okay, there we go. Okay. And just also a reminder, like with all of these, like this is purely based on my kind of like trial and error method. I wouldn't say that my experience is the one go-to. So by all means, if you guys have other experiences that have been more successful, please share them. I think what I'm telling you guys, or what I'm sharing with you guys, is really, unfortunately, stuff that I had to figure out on my own, even with asking other photographers. And what was interesting and also a bit sad was a lot of the photographers I talked to also didn't know, when it even comes to charging more for shared copyrights. A lot of people had just been like, yeah, we just get paid our day rate and that's it, versus charging X, Y, and Z more amounts of money for that. Let's see where I am. So that's kind of like, so that's assignment work, that's nonprofit, and also staff. One of my best advantages in this field has been focusing on my personal work. The commissions that come in are are definitely helpful, but I would say that my personal work has carried me so far. The work that when I was tired and I said, you know what, I'm just going to take my camera and go out and do this shoot or whatever the case may be, that is also what is now coming in as additional income, even though it was like a couple of years in the prepping, right? So for me personally, personal work is just creating stories and images that I am truly passionate about. I'm not doing it for a paycheck. I'm not doing it to pitch it. I'm not doing it, for a grant or any of that. I'm doing it because I'm genuinely passionate in it. And that is also another income source in terms of if you're looking for funding, to carry on your personal work, because there is a lot of, like I said before, there are a lot of challenges with, sorry, I hate looking at my face when I'm talking, but there are a lot of challenges with just being able to fund ourselves and our time. So my personal experience was I created a body of work, I pitched it, or I sent it as a grant saying like, hey, I need more funding for this, and I got the money. I created more of that work, and I took that work and I took it to another grant and I said, hey, I need more money for this. And I got a $30,000 grant for that work. That's the first one I had pitched to had been 3,000. And then from there, I was able to use that same body of work, and I submitted it to shows and art residencies, and I was able to get stuff off still that same work. And this is like probably 3 years now of the same body of work carried me through. And I wouldn't have been able to do it, and I wouldn't have actually been able to pay rent or like live like comfortably, comfortably actually, if I hadn't actually taken the time out to focus on my personal work and say, this is something that I'm truly passionate about. Because as a photographer, you're not just a storyteller in the sense of like, oh, you're sharing other people's stories. It's also important to tell your story. It's also important to share your own perspective on what you're experiencing and what you want to see. And that is also what the public wants to see. Your story matters just as much as the other people's stories that you are sharing. So I would say we have assignments that either come to you or you pitch for them. Pitching, unfortunately, for me, is a challenge. We can touch on that later. There's nonprofit work that you can also pitch for. I remember with Save the Children, for example, I applied to be on their photography roster in order to get some jobs from them. It took me about 2 years to get on their roster before I got one job, but it still helps. When the money comes in, you're like, oh, it's a good thing that I still applied for this like 2 years ago. What else do we have? So we have that, and then we also have, our personal work. And then we have staff jobs as well. All of this encompassed with, no matter what, because I actually kind of want to get into your questions because I know that I'm going to talk so much with that. All of this encompassed to say that I know there's also, and I don't know if maybe we're still aware of it, but I know before, when I got into photography, there was this sort of photography culture around social media and how to use it as a photographer. But please do not underestimate the power of social media in getting your work out there. In terms of using it as social media, be social on it, follow other photographers, see the editors the photographers are tagging in their captions when they post new work, hit up those editors, follow those editors, share your work. That is so important. Not just if you feel like, oh, well, I don't have any work to share, just be consistent. It's just the standard thing to do with life, is be consistent in whatever it is you're doing, including social media. And also don't feel as if you only have to, this is something I'm passionate about, but don't feel as if you only have to present this sort of like, I'm a serious photographer, journalist, documentarian photographer, and I have to present my work this way. It's all BS, because you're also having you're also having editors of our demographic coming into their new roles and positions, and they want to see you the same way they want to see your personal work. They don't want to just see the work that you're doing because you think X, Y, and Z publications will want. They want to see your personal work. They want to see your personality. Will they get along with you? Are you somebody that they would like to work with? Mystery is overrated on social media. So please utilize social media. Be consistent in your posting. I know that sometimes it is cringeworthy and a little bit embarrassing nowadays to post on social media. But just do it, because there are people online actually actively looking for your work to see what it is that you can do. And we're all very capable. And yeah, I think that's where I'll round off and just go into questions, Austin.
Yagazie, this is so amazing. And I hope everyone who's watching can appreciate sort of how unusual it is to get this kind of candor and transparency and honesty from someone. It's really incredible, and we can't thank you enough for this. It's just immeasurably helpful, and especially for subject material that can be rather dry, you've really made it pop. So that's
okay. Well, that's great, because I was just like, part of me was just looking at the document and I was like, oh my God, this is so boring.
Oh, it's great. It's great. But we've got a bunch of great questions in here. Polly, do you want to lead us into those?
Oh man, where do we even start? The chat has been on fire. We've already have some tweets on fire. Thank you for all the gems and insights. So I had told you I have my hoodie for today's occasion that says my rate's going up. I need to have I need one that says charge them, like
charge them. That's the meme.
That instead. So let me know when you drop that. But let's jump into these questions. Okay, I think we'll start from, let's see. I'll just start from the bottom up, from the most recent things you have been discussing. Moja asks, for full exclusivity, does it include raw files? And for the licensing agreement, is it included within the full exclusivity price?
Okay, sorry, I'm terrible with listening, so I'm just reading it again.
So yeah, when you're doing full exclusivity, do you include raw files?
No.
What do you send the client? Is it only in JPEGs? Do you ever send the raw files?
I never send the raw files. If a client, and I will always push on that, if a client is asking for like full on raw files, then they're going to pay a fee to match. And that'll probably be double the rates for that. Because my main issue is, and some people do send raw files, but my main issue, once again, is the value that I put on my images looking like my images. So if you are asking for my raw files, which are unprocessed and unedited, you just hired me as a tool. You didn't hire me for how, like, it's just like I just held a camera for you, Mm-hmm. So there's the money aspect, and there's also the principal aspect, where I'm like, if you hired me for my images not to look like my images, then what was the point? Some clients will push back and say that they definitely want the raw files. And it's definitely always about like negotiations, like say, well, it's going to be double the rate. And then in the back, you're like, oh my God, what will they say? And then they'll be like, no, we can do half. And you're like, okay. So it just really depends on how you feel about it. Also, to be honest, guys, in full transparency, is that during negotiations, I have lost out on jobs. They haven't all been successful, but for every client, and it wasn't actually a lot at the very least, but for every client that I lost out an opportunity from, there was always another client willing to pay my rates. Always. So even if the other one said, oh, we can't afford you, we can't do it, I was like, in my head, I'm like, well, now you know what my day rate is. So next time, hopefully, sorry, it couldn't work out.
Period. I love it. And next thing, a lot of people were asking about releases. You mentioned briefly releases. Are there any more insights you can share about how that works?
So in my experience with photojournalism and working for publications and whatnot, I think, journalism is very different, where obviously you're getting consent. But it's people, wanting to share their stories with you. And I personally feel as if releases, like if I'm covering a story for New York Times and I'm going to photograph someone who's been affected by a flood, and they're like, this is our story. It's almost transactional, where it's like, oh, you have to sign a release. In other experiences where most releases are used is because they have like a commercial aspect to it. So certain organizations like Save the Children or nonprofits, they're usually getting those images because they're trying to raise funds or they're doing it for their little marketing fundraising stuff. But the difference in those situations is a lot of the people being photographed, they're beneficiaries, i.e. they are people that are benefiting from some of the services that they are, they are provided. And that to me is even a more ethical practice, because even though they are your beneficiaries, they are not entitled to just say, you're not entitled to take their pictures of them anyhow, So the releases in that sense is necessary, because that way you're now reinforcing the fact that they have a choice to say no. And if you approach them without a release, they can just be like, oh, well, because this organization is providing for us, we should say yes, But then the tricky part about releases, of course, is, not so much tricky. You have to properly explain to people what those releases are, which is give them the summary and say the images are going to be used online. They're going to be used for X, Y, and Z. They're going to be on digital platforms. They're going to be in print. Are you okay with that? In my experience, the second I sense any moment of hesitation from someone, I back off. Even if they end up saying yes, I say no, because they hesitated and I'm like, you're not comfortable with it. And I feel as if you want to, you feel as if you can't say no. So just to play it safe. So consent releases are just basically consent also, especially if some organizations maybe want to use it as marketing material for more funds, XYZ.
That's super helpful. And do you typically have like a standard one that you have, or do they send you a release form?
They send me a release form. It's not my responsibility to come up with one. If they say I should, then I'll probably charge them.
I love it.
On a related note, if I could jump in, Polly, Alexa, I believe, was asking a question about the contract and where how the contract is generated. And I guess for people who might be working in a place, I believe she was saying in Ghana, with a very small NGO that might not be used to sort of creating these kinds of contracts. Have you worked in situations like that before, Yagazie, or in a situation where you need to come up with what the contract might be, or how might you sort of navigate that territory?
Absolutely not. That is, once again, it is not my job to do that. A lot of the times when I talk about like these changes is because they have sent me the contract and I have already the contract that I showed you, that's from back and forth. That's the end result of back and forth of me highlighting, saying, I'm not comfortable with this, remove this. I don't know what this means, So it's fully the client's responsibility to come up with a contract. Now, if you're asking them if they're asking for shared copyright or whatever, and you do not want to give it to them, it is your responsibility to now provide a licensing agreement, because those are your terms that you are requesting them to stick to. So with licensing agreements, you need to come up with that. I'm here. Let me just turn on the AC real quick.
Yeah, no problem. I see folks dropping in their handles in the chat, which is great. But if you had dropped a question in the chat, please drop in the Q&A box, because now it's getting lost within the midst of the handles. And we have some more great questions that we will continue to ask. The next question. So one of the photographers in the Black women photographers community, she recently had a portfolio review with the New York Times from the sessions that we've been hosting. And the photo editor stressed the importance of keeping social media platforms very private, as far as social and political beliefs. While it differs for everyone, what is your opinion on this? As someone who has, a large presence on Instagram and Twitter, and as someone who does, work for the New York Times and all the other, national, news organizations here in the West, and also internationally, do you have, a stance on this? Like, how do you balance that? And especially if there are social or political issues that are happening in your home country that you are passionate about.
I think that is terrible advice. I think that is rubbish. I do think, like, personally, I don't really share a lot of, like, like my political or like kind of like social beliefs on social media, in the sense of, like, if for an example, if I'm like pro-life or pro-choice, I'm not going to actively talk about it. But if there is, for an example, an issue happening in my home country where the rights of women and making choices about their bodies is actively being affected, I am going to speak up. Because at the end of the day, New York Times is an organization and they have their own legal blah, blah, blah. You're not on staff. You haven't signed a proper contract with them to, like, where you're an employee, which I feel is probably a different contract from the freelancing contract. But at the end of the day, I'm a staunch believer that, my personal beliefs, especially when, everyone, we always believe that we're right, but in Nigeria, like, am I going to keep quiet about NSAS? Am I going to stop talking crap about our president? Absolutely not. I don't think that's sound advice. I think there should be a balance with kind of with everything. You have people who are hyper religious, and let's say you're a hardcore, I don't know, Roman Catholic, and you're talking about all the time, like, defending the church and stuff like that. I think there are extremes to how much you put out there, and there should be a balance. Same thing with your personal life. If you're overly, I don't actually no. I think the answer is no. I think you need to obviously find a balance with not oversharing on social media in any aspect of with life. I personally just don't believe in oversharing, but I don't think it's a thing about, oh, keep your social and political life completely private or you'll never work with us, because at the end of the day, that's also just one editor's opinion.
Amazing. Thank you for your transparency there. Going to a few other different sets of questions.
Hey, Polly, can I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead.
There's a few people have asked questions that seem to be kind of related around the idea of how you sort of get up and running. Before you've really built a client list, before you're well known, or you have publications that want to hire you. And, so there've been a couple questions about, when you're starting out, what kind of gear should you be buying when you're on a budget? And how do you get going on a personal project when, you don't really have paid work yet? And how do you sort of like manage that process? I know that you said that, you can maybe try to get a staff job to help sort of fund the earlier part of your career, but can you talk a little bit about negotiating those early days when you need a camera or some gear to be able to get going, and you want to get personal work done, but you don't really have it. You're not there financially yet.
Yeah, like I said, unfortunately, like it's just not easy. Like it's not, there's not going to be an easy pass with this. Before I got into even getting a job as a staff photographer, I was struggling for 2 years straight. I was living on people's couches. I wasn't eating right because I literally didn't have enough money to feed myself. I was using money that, I would rather use money on on transportation to get to a meeting for a job opportunity before I would eat food. And I could not afford to pay for anything. People were literally feeding me and giving me like a place to stay. And that's just the unfortunate reality, which is why I said, if you have some sort of cushion in terms of support and whatnot, maximize on that. When I started out, I didn't have gear, but what I did have was a very tiny community of, and I'm thankful for this, of photographer friends, you know, and people would say, oh, Yagazie, can you shoot this? And I'm like, absolutely. And I'll go to my friend and say, please, lend me your camera. You know, give me your camera. And people would give me their camera to go off for like maybe 2 or 3 days, you know? So which is why it's so important to not be closed off, you know, in terms of feeling that you're absolutely alone. You know, reach out to people, even if they are strangers, reach out to people in your town. And obviously it's a big deal when a photographer gives you their camera, especially if they are they might be struggling as well, and it's a trust thing. And on the other side, some of us might not even be in a position to be close to a photo community. Do you have a phone? It's literally that. You know, do you have a phone with a camera? You know, tell those stories. Like, it's still about like training your eye. And I'm not trying to say like, you know, I hope I'm not glamorizing like the struggle in terms of like, yeah, start out with your camera phone. But that could also be, your journey could very well be the thing, and how you get to where you want to be could be the very thing that could be the stepping foot. There are photographers who started off with their careers because they took ridiculous phone pictures on their phone cameras. And someone was like, I'm going to give you an opportunity because I saw that one shot, you know. And there's this sort of like thing about gear, and yes, gear is important and it's fantastic, but at the end of the day, what's also important is your eye and how you approach a story, and the sort of like generally just your approach. So unfortunately, I'm sorry to say that it's not an easy thing. Like, I don't know what to say. It's struggle. Like, if I were to repeat any of what I went through, I would do my best to avoid it, because it was freaking depressing. So you just have to push through.
Thanks for that again, and thanks for your honesty here. I think the chat room is lighting up here because everyone just loves how open you're being about all this stuff. So thank you for that.
Yay.
And then this is maybe a little bit related, but then someone else also asked, do you sort of think about your income? Because, you know, photography, as you've said, is also an expensive profession, and there's a lot of gear that goes into it. So do you think about your income in such a way that you sort of break down and you're allowed to spend X% of your income on investing in new gear? Or do you sort of wear that gear out until it's not working anymore? Or how do you think about that?
Pretty much until, so when I started out, I had a Canon T2i. And the only reason I'm saying the name is because I literally didn't know any other cameras. So I'm literally just saying what I had. I didn't seek it out. It was thankfully a gift. And it was just kind of, it was like a point and shoot. And I tried to cover big stories with it. And when I knew that I couldn't have that story, I would borrow from other people, right? I couldn't do the job on that camera. But when I got the job in Liberia, I ended up investing, and this was, and once again, it's luck and opportunity, is it not? So I got this job in Liberia. I knew I was going to have income in. So I took out a loan and I bought a camera. I bought my Canon 5D because I knew that I was going to be able to pay it off, you know, within like what, 2-3 months or something like that, you know. Actually, no, it actually took me like a year or more to pay it off. In my head, I was like, yeah, the money will come and that's it. Forget about taxes. But so yeah, so that was how I was able to, and I stuck with that camera. So that was from 2016 until this year. I stuck with that camera. I stuck with that 24-105 lens. And then I think maybe 2 years ago, I bought another camera, which was like a small like Fuji thing, just because I was like, this looks cool and it's mirrorless. But for the majority of my career, I used the same camera until I got the Canon ambassadorship this year, which came with an entire new gear. Would I have continued to use my 5D if it wasn't for this ambassadorship? Yes, and I would have no plans to change it out, because personally, I just didn't understand, and maybe that makes me a bad photographer, I don't know, but you know, I have colleagues that often like complain about all the gear they have to carry. I just have a sling bag, like a bag that slings over my waist, and I just have that one camera and that one lens, and that is what I use, and I will still use it throughout until it literally stops working. Um, my approach with getting new gear is if mainly the opportunity comes. So in my case, it was like, please give me free something. You know, I want free because I'm not going to spend my own money because I don't believe in that. So personally, I just never set aside anything for buying new gear because I truly believe like it should come to me for free.
Someone else here has asked an interesting question. You spoke earlier about how a lot of your clients now are coming to you, and so you're not having to do a whole lot of pitching, although you have to do still some. And someone's asked about, the timing of pitches, and if you know something big, a political event or something is happening in a couple of weeks. I mean, 2 weeks away is probably a little bit too tight of a window to be pitching someone. So how do you sort of think ahead in the calendar, and is there a sort of a rule of thumb about how far out from an event you need to be getting in touch with editors?
Personally, I don't think I'm the right person to answer that because when it comes to pitching, if I am going to pitch a project, usually my pitching is for a grant or for a residency because it's a long-term project. In terms of news coverage, I would say the closest one that I can relate to was, covering NSAS. And for me was, and this is just my personal belief and practice, I wasn't interested in covering current affairs, my country's current affairs for like a foreign publication. Like I'm so glad that I didn't go out thinking like, oh, I'm taking pictures for this organization or whatever. And I guess it also depends on the sensitivity or also the necessity of the story. But that's also because I believe in the power of my platform. So for me with digital and social media, I was like, I can put these stories out there and I can still inform people and it can still be shared the same way any publication would want, and I'm doing it from, not that it's ever intentional, but I think it would have been very different if I was covering these sort of current political happenings for a publication versus I'm a participant and I care about my neighbors next to me, and I want to document what's happening. Some people are very fortunate enough to just remove that mentality and still have that approach when they're working on jobs. But unfortunately, personally, I just don't seek out those sort of stories to pitch specifically to publications.
I'll also add, because I recently did this, that if it is, because the question was, specific about 2 weeks away, that isn't too late per se. For me, I'm based in the States. And I know one thing that, publications here would cover is the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre that happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I knew I was close by. I'm within driving distance of Tulsa, just 3 hours away. And I literally sent an email to editors at the New York Times, NPR, and Reuters a week and a half before the anniversary. And I was able to get an assignment for the New York Times and Reuters. So it really just depends because sometimes you just never know. They may need extra hands. If you are local and you can actually, head up there, then you can find a way. But like Yagazie said, if you, even if you don't get an assignment, if you don't get that work, still go there, still document it. It's still important. Have that in your personal portfolio for the next time. So sometimes you can get lucky in that sense, knowing the timing, knowing that they may need extra hands because it is a major event that these publications would cover. Either way, you should still be out there and document it. And with that said, we do have a lot of questions relating to pitching. Again, we had a class on this a few weeks ago, so please do catch the webinar replays because we want to make sure we're specific to the questions here that Yagazie can actually answer and staying within the subject. And we are close out of time, so I'll go back to Austin where we can try to answer a few more questions before we wrap up.
Yeah. there's, some of this territory is super complicated and maybe and difficult. You've done a really great job of trying to communicate some of these complicated terms, but there's a couple questions around like the idea of copyright, and what does that mean exactly? What are you selling when you, whether you have a shared copyright agreement or if the organization is saying that the copyright would be all of theirs and not yours at all. I know it's hard to put an exact, you've been very open with what your rates have been, but it's hard to put an exact price tag on what that means. Mm-hmm. But can you maybe expand a little bit more on the notion of copyright and why it's so important to be really careful about giving that away?
Copyright, from my understanding, now if you ask me to give you the Webster definition of copyright, I don't know what it is. But copyright for me is my work, it's literally the rights that you have to reproduce my work and do whatever you want to do with it. Which is why I'm very protective of it now, because in the past I would just, sign contracts anyhow, and the work would basically be used as kind of like stock images, like how Getty does their images, where you see a beautiful image and it's just being used for basically like $1 per image, and the amount of work that you put into it. Depending on clients, unfortunately, there isn't fixed rates or whatnot on how to share with how to price your copyright and what's to put value on. For example, like I said, commercial is completely different, and sometimes they might be a little bit more transparent with, okay, well, we're gonna put your image out on a billboard, so that's like $20,000 flat, which to some people might be high, but to other people it's probably a low rate. I'm sorry, Austin, I'm kind of spiraling here because like how much details do you want on for me, it's just like copyright is just making sure that where your work is going and how it's going to be used. So shared copyright is literally shared. So you and the client are sharing it equally. The same rights you have to it is what they have to your work. Exclusive, full exclusive or full ownership, it comes in different phrases, is literally them owning the work full on. Like you can't use it. They have bought your work from you fully, which is why
the rates need to be higher.
Which is why the rate should be higher, because for me, and also when it comes to personal work, our careers also depend on longevity and also being able to evolve. So you don't want to be in a situation where you want to sell your prints, and now your prints in the market value can be at like maybe $2,000, $3,000 per image, but you can't actually sell it because you don't own your own image, and you have a contract that said that you sold those rights for like $3,000 years ago. So it's something that you should always fight for. It's something that you should always like constantly research on, because the prices are always changing. It's something that you should always, talk to other photographers about. I remember a job I took where the client had offered me a day rate of like $1,000. And this was probably in 2017. And I was like, wow, $1,000 for a day rates and that was to fly to London. I was like, that's pretty amazing. Like I'll just, for one day, I get $1,000. And I talked to the photographer and she was like, no, your day rate should be $4,000, and I went back and they said, yes. And that was also because they wanted like full exclusivity, which I ended up pushing back against. So I could also use the work for at least my, portfolio. But back then I should have pushed more to know that, if I want to sell the work, I can. But that was something that I unfortunately lost out of. And they were so quick to go from $1,000 to $4,000 because they knew what they were getting from me. They knew that I would never be able to use those images. And those are images that I would like to have up at exhibitions now, or to be able to print out, but I don't have the rights to do that. Right. So sometimes, it's just about always like endlessly doing the research on that.
Well, and one of the some of the big takeaways, I think, from your talk today, and you've said this several times, is first of all, you guys can always come back and watch this on our website later if there's things that you want to get refreshed on. but also reaching out to your community, whether whoever those people are, asking other photographers for advice. That's something you should feel free to do. But the other thing is, and I think it's important to remember, is that we all mess up, right? Especially early in our careers. We all sign contracts we wish we hadn't signed. We've all done that a bunch of times, and that's not the end of the world. And that's how you learn. So don't be afraid of that, and that's part of the learning process.
Absolutely.
We are just a little bit over time here. I mean, we could go on. There's a bunch of questions, but I also want to be sort of conscious of people's time. I hope this has been helpful for everybody. Polly, anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
No, like I said, this has been amazing. Truly a master class. I see several super helpfuls. I've already seen people share some gems on social. I've already seen people asking for the link to the hoodie that says "Charge them."
And your hoodie too, Polly. They want that one.
Oh, and yes, and I've got this from another Black photographer. I try to support in that sense. So yeah, thank you, Yagazie. Any last words from you before we close?
I would say just the same spiel I said earlier, which is, I mean, echoing Austin, it's okay to make mistakes and don't be too hard on yourself. I would say, advise you guys to always stand your ground and know your worth, because even if you feel as if you're losing a particular job, it will benefit you again in the future, just to make sure like a client isn't stepping on your neck to get what they want because they know that maybe you need the money and whatnot. But then it's also okay to sometimes fold when you need the money, because our survival and our care is also essential and we need to provide for ourselves. So don't be too hard on yourself. Either way, you may fall. And then also with stories is, I would say, just do the work first. And it's always going to be challenging and it's not going to be easy. Do the work first, regardless of whether you're getting paid for it or not, and the rest will always follow. If you do not do the work first, nothing comes after that. So do the work first.
Such great. That's right. Do the work first.
Personal work.
And charge them.
And charge them.
Yes. Every class, someone has mentioned personal work. So if you don't get the point now, like every class, somebody has said personal work, personal work. It will pay in the long run. Thank you so much, as always, for your insights. Again, you guys, you can, if you missed what the contract looked like, that breakdown, this was recorded. You can pause it when you replay the conversation, pause and look and really, get that understanding that you need after this class, after we put it up on social later today. And again, the grants from the Everyday Projects expires, the deadline, I should say, is in 5 days, not expires. The deadline is in 5 days. Anyone can apply. $6,000 USD, and it comes with a mentor, an industry, leading mentor. So do apply. We'll drop that in the chat once more. It's also, on the Everyday Project site, the first thing you'll see. I don't think I'm forgetting anything. This was the last class of our part 1 of the essentials. We've had 5 classes that started at the top of May, and now it's, concluding today with Yagazie. But we are doing a part 2 of the essentials. So if there's something else that you want to learn, if you want us to unpack something else, then we didn't explore, because there's only so much you can talk about in like 75 minutes. So do let us know. You will get a survey after this to, share any feedback, anything else that you want to, mention, or give more kudos to the different speakers you've heard over the past month. Yeah, Austin, anything else from you?
I think that is it. Yagazie, thank you so much again. This was terrific. Yeah. And thanks.
You guys liked it and enjoyed it. Fantastic.
And thanks to everyone for joining us. And yes, as Polly said, we're going to do a second semester soon. So keep stay in touch on that.
All right. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
Everyone.
Bye.
Guys, I'm really, is there a behind the scenes that we're doing after?
Yes, we're gonna do part 2 with you. Just you're good. Thank you.
All right, bye.
Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye.